So this is my dough here. It got nice and proofy. It feels really airy and light. You can see how much it grew in there. We just had like a little tight ball yesterday. So it looks like it had a great time in the fridge last night. Just wonderful. I'm just kind of gonna tip it out. I'm not gonna add any flour at this point, and we're gonna try and keep flour to a minimum on this particular dough. And the reason for that is that we're kind of gonna need it to stick to the bench a little bit in order to get everything rolled out well. So yeah, I'm just gonna kind of press it down and degas it a little bit. And then if you made the same size batch that is posted in the recipe, you should be able to divide this into 3 9-ounce pieces, or right around 9 ounces. If you don't have a scale, just try and press it out into a rectangle like this and make it nice and even, so it's all about the same thickness everywhere, and then just divide it in 3. You can just kind of eyeball it and give it your best guess. What we're gonna try and do is make as few cuts as possible, because the less we cut it, the less we interfere with the gluten structure that we've worked so hard to build here. And kind of the nicer and more uniform it'll be, the less we'll have to work it so it doesn't get too tight on us. But I'm gonna go ahead and use my scale. So here we go. I guess right about there. And if you can cut it into kind of rectangular pieces like this, that'll actually be helpful in us shaping it too. So that's about 8 ounces. Almost. Okay. Set that over there. My second piece here. It's a little bit big. Great. And then this one should be good. Great. So, again, it doesn't have to be exact. We're putting this all into a braid. So getting it to be a pretty close estimation will be just fine. So just to kind of recap, what we've done so far is the mix, and then we've also done our bulk fermentation, which is kind of like the first big fermentation process. And we did some punching. Sometimes you do punching and folding with different doughs, but we punched it down before we put it in the fridge to retard overnight. And all of that is lending to a really good fermentation. We should get a nice big rise. We should have really good structure in here, and also really good flavor. So this step is called the pre-shape. Well, we just did the divide, and then we're gonna do the pre-shape and the bench rest. So for this pre-shape, I want you to take your dough in the little rectangles that we've made. You can press it out just a little bit and just very gently kind of roll it over on itself. So I'm not sealing it. I'm not pressing hard at all. This is still pretty open, but I'm just kind of gonna start it into the shape that I eventually want it to be in, which is gonna be a nice long cylinder. And I'm gonna put it up here and do the same thing with all of these pieces. Again, so you can see, I'm just lifting it with my pinky fingers and kind of tucking it over, and then rolling it so that the seam is on the bottom. And you end up with a nice loose cylinder, is what this pre-shape is called. Okay, and one more time. And so we have our cylinders here, and now we're gonna give it a bench rest. I'm gonna let this sit for a few minutes, and this part of it since we've just divided it and we've rolled it a little bit, we've pre-shaped it, the gluten is activated, and we're gonna let it relax a little bit now, and that will make it easier for us to form the final shape once the dough has had a chance to relax. It's also pretty cold right now, so it'll temper a little bit in that time, and that will also help us get it into the final shape. So while that's and I am lucky to be like pretty well set up right now. I have a lot of resources. And so if you want to make a donation kind of like as part of this process, some people have given me extra money for baking kits, for instance, and I'm going to be forwarding that money on to the Full Plate Fund. So if you want to look them up online, I will try to post a link after this to make it easy for folks. But yeah, that will be a really nice thing to send some money to help some people out. So if you can hear me here, I'll just stay on this view. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I did a test run earlier and it worked on the recording, but sometimes streaming over live is a little complicated. So yeah, I don't know if you guys caught what I was saying about the Full Plate Fund, but it's basically, it's a charity that's working in King County right now to make one-time payments of $500 to out-of-work food and beverage workers, so bartenders and servers and cooks and all of those folks who have been really deeply affected by COVID-19. And I think that it's a great option for charitable donations right now because it provides money where it's really needed most. I know that working in the industry as I am right now, I'm currently furloughed, and that means that yes, I can get unemployment, but it takes a while to come through, and it's, you know, it's not what I would normally make. So I'm doing fine financially, luckily, but there are a lot of people out there who are in a much more dire situation. So if you want to make a donation, if you want to do it in the name of quarantine baking, then that's wonderful. But please send it to the Full Plate Fund, and I'll try and post some information in the group page about that. And in the meantime, I think after all of the technical difficulties and all of my blabbering on, we are ready to jump back into our dough. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab these guys. So we made our loose cylinder, and if you guys are doing this along with me, the dough should feel a little bit more relaxed right now. It's still cold, so it's gonna be a little bit tight, but you should be able to feel that it's just a little bit looser and a little more workable. So I've still got my seam here. It's, you know, it's just a loose cylinder, but I'm gonna flip it upside down like this and press it out. You can be pretty firm here because we're gonna roll it into a tight cylinder to create our braid for the challah. So it's gonna be a very similar process. I'm gonna roll this over with my pinky fingers, but this time instead of going over again, I'm gonna press it down and give it kind of a light seal so that it looks like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm going to kind of try and keep it even on the ends here because this is going to be our final shape, so we want to be a little bit more exact at this point. And I'm going to roll it over like that so that I kind of have this split in the middle, and then you can turn it towards you, and using the edge of your hand right here, you press it into itself and seal it. You can be pretty firm here, you're not going to hurt it. You can see how it's pressed up against the counter. And this is why we don't really want any flour on our bench, is because we're using the tackiness to help seal this. So now that I've got kind of that base seal, you can see it's already gotten longer in this process than what it was. So we're already adding some length to it, which means less work in this part. So as we're rolling, I'm going to keep these two fingers on my bench, and my thumbs are also going to be touching the bench. And as I'm rolling, I'm pulling the dough back, and I'm kind of pressing that seal up against the counter again. And when I push forward with my thumbs, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm pushing and pulling, but I'm keeping these fingers against the counter so that as I'm adding length, I'm also reinforcing that seal. And I want my challah loaf to be a little bit thicker in the middle, so I'm tapering my ends a little bit. I'm not worried about keeping them blunt. If you want yours blunt, just make sure that as you're rolling in the middle, you aren't pushing out too far, and you can kind of cup your hands to blunt that end a little bit. Without, you probably won't get as much length on it. But I want to taper mine a little bit here. So, and then I kind of do a little back and forth just on the edges to give it a little extra taper. If we look over, this seal is nice and even. It's almost not visible in some parts. If yours didn't totally seal, that's fine. You can just take and pinch it closed like this, and it'll be just as good. And then when I pick this up, I'm going to start from the ends and gently lift it and place it over here. I'm going to try not to stretch it too much. Keep it nice and even when I set it aside. And then I'm going to move on to the next one, and it's just the same process here. I flip it over, I'm patting it out. You can kind of lift it up to unstick it from the table, and then folding it into the center, doing a light seal, and I'm going to roll it over, have it face me, and then seal with the edge of my palm. And at that point, I can start rolling. And if you see like it's a little bit uneven here, that's fine, we can fix that. What I'm gonna do is start that rolling process over in the thicker part so that I can more evenly distribute the dough as I work my way down. And then when I get to that thinner part, I'm just not really gonna press much. I'm gonna kind of move my hand over it instead. And that'll help to even it out a little bit. And then I think I'll go over it one more time here, just for good measure. Make sure that it's around the same length. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're going to lift it up, place it next to its friend over here, and then do it one more time. Okay, fold it over, light seal, fold it over again, and then a hard seal with our palm. and then roll. I'm pushing it into the counter with those fingers that I'm keeping on the counter. I'm not really pushing down on the bread with my hands, just with these fingers is all I'm using to get this length at this point. And that is going to give us a really nice tight cylinder, instead of just kind of flattening it out. It's pulling everything into the center and making it really nice and tight, which you should be able to feel yourself once you get to this point. It should feel a lot tighter than it was when we picked it up from the bench rest. So here we have it. We have our 3 strands of our challah braid rolled out. And there are a couple of different ways of doing the braid. I think one of the easiest ones to show for me is by starting in the center. So I'm just kind of going to gently lay these over each other in this cross pattern. And then basically you're just going to swap your strands. So we're swapping this way, and then we're swapping that way. We're swapping this way, we're swapping that way. This way and that way. And then when I get to this point, I'm going to give it a good strong pinch to seal those strands together at the end. And then you can lift the whole thing up and turn it back towards you. So again, if I have 1, 2, and 3, I'm putting 2 over 1, and then 3 under 1, and then 2 is coming under 3, and 1 is coming under 2. I think I counted that right. And that's a nice simple way to get a braid. We've got kind of an extra little twist in the center, which I think is a nice stylistic thing. And once I'm at this point, since I like my challah a little thicker in the center and a little tapered at the ends, I'll lay it out, and I'm actually going to roll the whole loaf like this. I'm not pressing the braid itself at all. I'm only pressing the ends and rolling just gently to give it a little bit more of that tapered look. And that's all you have to do. It's a pretty simple shape. I know that sometimes it can be a little difficult to roll these cylinders, but if you've got some good development, then it shouldn't really be tearing on you. It shouldn't be too sticky or too wet. It is a little easier to roll it out on wood, but I've got just this quartz countertop here, and it was just fine. I didn't have to use any flour or anything like that. So we're in pretty good shape there. And pull out my sheet pan here. So once you're at this point, you can just pick up the whole loaf and pop it on your sheet pan. This underneath here is a silpat. If you just have parchment, that's absolutely fine. If you don't have either of those things and you want to bake it straight on the pan, just go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of flour down first. This bread is rich enough, it shouldn't really stick too much, but just to be safe, It won't hurt it to put a base layer of flour. You don't need a lot, but just a little trail of it that you can set the loaf on top of. And then we're going to take some plastic wrap and just kind of lightly drape it over. This will keep the moisture in and create kind of a little warm environment for it. And that's it. It's pretty simple. You don't have to work that hard. It doesn't take that long. So this is definitely something you can do if you're working from home on your lunch break, or start in the morning and bake it later on that day. You can split it up and spread it out over a couple of days like we did. So that's pretty easy. Now at this point, this loaf is not proofed, so we don't want to bake it yet. We're going to let it proof for 2 or 3 hours would be my guess. Well, it'll depend on how warm it is in your place, what the humidity is like. That's the thing about bread and yeast in general, is that we are always playing defense. It's the boss, and it's our job to respond to it, to figure out what it needs, to try and speak its language, because it is for sure not going to speak ours. So as you get to know your different doughs a little bit better, then you'll be able to respond and kind of identify, like, oh, I think this dough needs a little bit more water, or, you know, the water was too cold. I'm going to put it in a warmer place in the kitchen so that it develops nicely. There are a lot of things that you can do to kind of course correct if you feel like things are going sideways. But you just have to pay attention and be engaged, and accept the fact that you're not in charge. The dough is in charge. And that's something that I actually really love about making bread. It's alive and it has personality. And in a time where we're all sitting at home alone in quarantine, it's nice to feel like you have a friend that is actually interactive. So here's this guy. I'm going to put him over here. And I made a loaf earlier that I will post the video of, because I actually filled this guy with cinnamon sugar. So hopefully it'll be kind of a like spiral cinnamon sugar challah. But you can see how much bigger it's gotten. I can show you just for reference. This is a much bigger loaf. This is how much it's grown. It's much more airy. So this guy has a ways to go before he's a mature loaf, like our friend over here. This one might be a little bit bigger than this one ends up, just because it does have some filling in it, but honestly it's not that much. It's just a very thin layer of cinnamon sugar. So this one should get pretty close to the same size actually. But this gives you kind of a reference of like what to expect and how much this loaf will actually grow before we bake. So speaking of baking, let's go ahead and egg wash this. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. That's what we're going to bake this at. And you don't need to preheat your oven just yet if you haven't actually, if you've just shaped your loaf, or if you haven't gotten around to that yet. You only need to preheat it, 30 minutes before you're actually ready to bake. And this is going to take a couple of hours. So don't feel like you need to have the oven running needlessly. However, if you want to make coconut macaroons with me here in a few minutes, go ahead and turn it on now. And we'll get some coconut toasting and we'll get those cookies ready to go. But my oven is ready because I knew I was going to be baking this guy. So, egg wash is going to help seal in some of the moisture as this bakes, but mostly what it's going to do is give it a really beautiful color. When you see croissants or brioche or different egg breads, like they all get an egg wash, and it gives it that gorgeous yellow, orangey color that just feels really rich and nice. So that's what we're gonna do. Different people have different egg wash recipes, and you are welcome to play around with it. I'm gonna keep this pretty simple. A lot of people like to do egg yolk and cream. Some people do just cream or just buttermilk. At school, my chef did one whole egg and one yolk. I'm gonna do a couple of egg yolks. I like just a pure yolk egg wash myself. And this is my egg white container where I keep all of my egg whites that I use along the way. If you are worried that your yolk is gonna break, you can just crack it into kind of like a quarantine container and then dump your whites into a container to save them. Egg whites are super handy if you're doing baking projects. I make buttercream out of them all the time. You make French macaroons with egg whites. We're going to use some today to make coconut macaroons, so save those whites if you want to make those with me. And they'll keep in the fridge just like this for about a month or longer if you want to test it. And they will freeze as well for a lot longer. So you can really get a lot of use out of them. You don't have to worry too much about them going bad. Just to talk about the egg a little bit, I don't know if anyone cares, but I find it kind of interesting. The white is basically just protein. It's this albumin protein, and there's no fat or anything in it to really go rancid. All of the fat exists in the yolks, which is also where a lot of the nutrition comes from, but also the cholesterol. So the yolks are much more likely to go bad than whites, and that's just about why eggs have an expiration date on them in the first place, is because the yolks can actually go rancid. So I'm just going to take my yolks, grab a little fork here, mix them up a little bit. If you see these little white pieces that come off of the egg, that's called Challah, and that is what holds the yolk in place inside of the egg. It's kind of like a little, I don't know, I guess like the equivalent of a tendon for an egg. You can also thin this out with a little bit of water if you don't want it quite so thick. I think I will do that. Just make sure you're using cool water. If you use super hot water, you can cook the yolk, which we don't want to do. And it's just maybe a teaspoon is plenty. And that way I can egg wash both of these loaves with this one batch. See, a real professional would have had their tools all set out for them, so you didn't have to watch me dig through this very dirty, disorganized tool drawer looking for one specific pastry brush, which I may not even be able to find at this point, so that's fine. We'll use this basting brush instead. Pastry brushes are super useful and helpful. They're good for basting lots of different things, but especially if you want to egg wash something, they come in handy. But this guy, which is kind of like a silicone, more of a basting brush for meats and things like that, will work just fine. So we're just gonna brush kind of with the loaf here. It's pretty hearty. It's not that delicate like croissants would be. But this way we can avoid getting too much excess egg down in these crevices, because we don't want scrambled eggs sitting on top of our loaf. We just want a nice sheen when we bake it. So we don't want to use too much of this. Plus it's kind of therapeutic, a little bit like, I don't know, paint by numbers or something. If you look at the speckles that I have in this one, I put cardamom in here and orange zest, and then I've got it filled with that cinnamon sugar. So I'm very much looking forward to my weekend brunch. I'd love to hear what you guys are planning to do with your loaves. They make really great French toast. That's a classic one. Good bread pudding too. And then on top of this, I think I'll put some poppy seeds. It's really common to see poppy seeds on challah loaves. You can also do sesame seeds, nigella seeds, fennel, caraway. It's all just according to your taste and preference, so feel free to play around with that. I'm just kind of going to lightly sprinkle it. The egg wash will make it really nice and easy for these to adhere, which is great. And I like the flavor and the kind of gentle crunch that poppy seeds provide, so this will be very well adjusted to my tastes. And just like that, he's ready to go in the oven. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick it in. My oven rack is basically just in the center of the oven. I'm gonna set a timer for 15 minutes on my watch here, and just take a look at it at that point. I'll see if it needs rotated. If you notice that it's not browning evenly, you can move it around your oven. Different ovens have different hot spots. You may have a convection oven, which you're welcome to use. Just make sure to adjust your temperature down 25 degrees and adjust your baking time accordingly. But it'll still bake a beautiful loaf. It won't dry it out. You just kind of have to keep an eye on it. My oven is just a classic conventional old school oven, so nothing exciting there as far as my settings. All right, so if I go over here, this is what I get for trying to be fancy with different takes and images. I'm so not the right person for this, so I apologize, guys. I'm doing my best, and I will hopefully continue to improve. I'll run a few more tests before I put out the next video, but for now, let's just stay on this view if everyone can hear me. Yeah, let me know if it goes out again. So I'm just going to angle this down so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so the recipe calls for 3 egg whites, and an egg white is generally about 1 ounce each. So I'm going to weigh that out. If you have your 3 egg whites handy, you can just count them out. That's not a problem. This is also something that you have a little bit of wiggle room. It doesn't need to be totally exact. You'll be okay either way, for sure. So, let's see. Let me just pull up my recipe here to reference. Alright, so I've got my 3 whites, and then we're going to do 7/8 cup, basically just a scant 1 cup, or about 6.5 ounces of sugar. Cool. Got my sugar in there. At this point, you're going to want to go ahead and start whisking. The reason for this is that sugar has a property where it's hygroscopic, which means that it will attract water, and the process of pulling the water out of the egg whites, or yolks actually, is that process will actually start to kind of cook the proteins in it. So you want to whisk it and keep it moving, and that will keep that from happening. It's a similar concept to when you want to temper eggs with whenever you're adding them to a hot mixture. If you keep it moving, then that process happens really gradually, and you won't end up overcooking them. So I'm just whisking this a little bit, and I'm going to pop it over on my pot, and then I'm going to check on this sound again, because it sounds like some people are getting some feedback from the laptop. So, okay guys, sorry for that interruption. I think something happened with my cable connection between the cell phone and the laptop, so it looks like the picture is coming in now. Just let me know if you're not seeing it. Okay, wonderful. Sounds like things are better, so I'm going to continue. So in case you missed anything, I'm not sure where exactly this is all cutting out, but the egg whites are now on the pot over here, and I'm just going to stir them occasionally. This is, so if I just keep them stirred occasionally, basically it'll keep the whites from overcooking, because we don't want them to get hot. Again, we're just kind of gently heating them to solidify some of those proteins. And then it will, sorry, I keep losing my train of thought. Yeah, it'll dissolve the sugar as well, so that we have a nice smooth texture instead of something that's grainy. And it looks like my Challah timer is going off, so I'm going to take a look at that. All right, the challah is looking nice and beautiful. I did go ahead and rotate it 180 degrees so that I get some nice even browning. I'm gonna set, I'll check it in another 10 minutes, I think, just to make sure. Stir my egg whites over here. Okay. So, I have my egg whites, and I didn't bring my thermometer today. If you have one, please feel free to use it. At about 100 degrees is when we're gonna add our coconut to this. And basically I'm just using my finger. This feels just slightly warm to the touch. And if you figure humans are about 98 degrees, if it's just barely warm, that should be right in the range of where we need it to be. So you can feel free to do the same thing if you don't have access to a thermometer right now. And then we're going to add 6 ounces of coconut. So a lot of times all that you can find is kind of the sweetened shredded coconut, which is totally fine to use. They will come out a little bit sweeter. This isn't insanely sweet stuff. I was able to get some Bob's Red Mill, and this one is also a little bit finer texture. I'll show you the difference here. This is more of a desiccated coconut, and then I've got kind of the longer shreds. And so for mine, I'm gonna go ahead and do a 50-50 blend. I think that that'll produce a nice texture. Honestly, I have done it solely with sweetened shredded coconut. They come out beautiful. If that's all you have on hand, that is totally fine. If you don't like sweetened coconut and all you have is the unsweetened kind, that's gonna be great as well. These are your macaroons. Make them the way that you want them or the way that you can at this point, because I know ingredients are kind of scarce. So I'm gonna go ahead and do half and half. Something that I neglected to do at this point, but would usually do also, is toasting half of my coconut first. If you just stick it in the oven for about 10 minutes, making sure to stir it 2 or 3 times throughout that time, you can get a nice golden brown color on your coconut, and it'll be nice and caramelized. And if you mix it in with untoasted coconut, it shouldn't over brown or anything, and you should still get a nice chewy end product. But I ran out of time today because despite being fun employed right now, I am still terrible at managing my schedule. Go figure. Some things never change. What are you gonna do? Learn from it? Grow? Come on. What is this? 1999? I don't think so. So I'm just gonna mix this stuff together with my whisk. You can see it's pretty sticky, pretty soupy. If we feel like we need it, we can definitely add more coconut to this. But for now, we're gonna throw it back on our pot of water and cook it about another 30 degrees. You guys, this kitchen is starting to smell so good with that challah. I wish I could broadcast that to you. But in theory, you'll all be smelling it very soon. I'm very excited for you. So yeah, we're just kind of gonna let this go. It shouldn't take much longer to get that extra temperature on there. I'm just gonna kind of give it a stir every so often. Make sure that it doesn't totally go over where we want it to be. And what's happening right now is the coconut is hydrating with the liquid from the egg whites and the sugar to kind of form I guess, some estimation of a dough. It's definitely similar to a batter, somewhere between a batter and a dough. And as I'm over here, it's getting thicker. It still feels pretty loose, like a batter does, but it's definitely thickening up. I may want to add a little bit more coconut just to dry it out a touch, but I'm going to let it keep going for now. Until we hit that temperature. I'm going to use my hands to test the temperature again, and it should feel like, so I guess, how can I put this? Lattes, when you order them, are usually around 140 degrees is like drinking temperature. So if you think about how that to-go cup feels in your hand, that's pretty hot. We don't want to get quite that hot. So it should feel quite warm when you're going in to test it, but you don't want it to scald. You don't, definitely, please be careful, don't burn your hands here. You can kind of just hover your hand above the bowl and see if it's going to be too hot for you to touch. But with this gentle heat coming from the water, it won't happen super, super quick. So if you're keeping an eye on it and checking it every minute or so, you should have a very low risk of actually burning yourself or the egg whites. Got a little ways to go, so I'm going to take a moment to clean my area a little bit. One of the drawbacks of doing this at home is that I don't have a fancy TV staff to come in and clean up for me. But one of the things you learn as a food professional is to clean as you go. So if you guys are doing this right alongside me, now's a good moment to just give your counter a little sanitizing wipe. Try and get, whenever I use these sanitizing sprays, which this one is a natural one, so hopefully not a lot of terrible, scary chemicals in it. But I do try and get the residue off of the counter, especially if I'm going to be putting dough directly onto it. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's not so much that it's a risk for you to consume it, so long as you're not liberally pouring sanitizer into your products. But it is something that will kill the yeast if you're working with yeasted products. So that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind as you're like building breads, and especially with wild yeast that has a little less power, or as it's not going to be quite so activated as commercial yeast. You don't want to kill all of your little yeast buddies by having sanitizer on your counter. All right. So I think I've got a little bit longer to go here. Sometimes you'll have to turn your heat down on your double boiler. It'll, even on a lower heat setting, it'll start to like bubble and fizzle and stuff just because you've got it covered. So that's fine and normal. All right, timer's going off for the challah. Let's take a look. Woo. Okay. I think it might be be done. I'm going to bring it over here. And we have quite a lovely challah loaf, if I say so myself. So one thing to look for, first of all, if you have an oven thermometer or just an instant read thermometer, feel free to go ahead and poke it near the center of the loaf. And it should read at least 195 degrees. 200, 205, 210 are all good readings. But at least 195 if you don't want raw dough in the middle of here. I'm looking for even browning. I'm not worried about these creases getting really dark. They should stay kind of light. And you can see on the side here, where the egg wash didn't reach all the way down, I still have browning. So that's good. And then if I can gently kind of lift this up, I'll show you. The bottom is nice and brown as well. And as I'm tapping it, it sounds hollow, which is good. And that means that all of that excess moisture has evaporated out of it. It's cooked all the way through, and it feels firm to the touch. It's got a little bit of like a crust on it. And then even in these lighter parts in the center, there's some spring back coming from it. So it doesn't feel super soft like it would if it was raw. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this. It'll also continue to carry over. It's what's called carryover cooking. So, you know, the pan is hot, the loaf is hot. It's going to continue cooking. You're gonna continue getting starch gelatinization and protein coagulation and all of those good things that eventually turn into a beautiful loaf of bread. But all in all, that was about 25 minutes at 350 degrees. And we came out with quite a lovely loaf of challah. I'm happy with that. So there's that guy. I check my macaroon coconut over here. Feels about right to me. So I'm going to go ahead and shut my pot of water off. I'm going to swap out my whisk for a rubber spatula here. And bring this back over. So you can see it's still pretty wet, this mix is. And as it cools, it'll definitely thicken up a bit. But I think I'm going to go ahead and add some more coconut as some extra absorption in here. So I'm going to add a little bit of the shredded sweetened stuff. And a little more of the unsweetened, desiccated stuff, and just kind of eyeball it. That's one thing with baking. I think people get afraid to deviate at all from the recipe because it is a little more exact than cooking, and people feel like you don't have nearly as much room to like play around or experiment, and to some extent that's true. It's good to have an understanding of what's going on in the product, which is why I'm trying to bring in some scientific explanation of what's happening. But you also have the ability to play around a little bit more than you might think. And it's good to know where you can do that, because sometimes if you're baking at a higher elevation or in a drier climate or in a wetter climate, the measurements that are written on a recipe that you find might not be exactly what you need them to be. You might need to make some alterations, again, to adjust to the product that you're making. So if something feels wrong and you're reading through the recipe and there's no notes about like, oh, you know, this part looks funny, but it comes out fine or whatever, feel free to kind of experiment. At the end of the day, it's just food. And that's something that we shouldn't take for granted, but it's also, we're not heart surgeons here. So if something comes out disappointing or even inedible, and believe me, I've had that happen a ton of times, it's still not the end of the world. And don't be afraid to get your hands in there, get dirty, make mistakes. That's what is so fun about it, and it makes the successes feel that much better. So I don't know if you guys can see this. That amount of coconut I added, I think helped a lot. I've got much more of a like clumpy batter. It's not running off of here so much as it's falling off in chunks, which is great. I am going to just let this cool down a little bit. And set it aside here. I'm going to go ahead and get my sheet tray ready to bake these guys. So these can go in the oven the same temperature as the challah, which is one reason that I picked them. They can bake at 350 degrees. It should be a pretty quick bake. And then if I like them dipped in dark chocolate, I'm not going to bother tempering dark chocolate right now. If that's a skill that you're interested in learning how to do, that's definitely another option I can look at doing a video for down the road. Just let me know. I'm not going to fuss with it today though. And you need a pretty high quality of chocolate in order to be able to temper it, which can be hard to locate in your local grocery store and stuff. So I think that most people probably don't have the ability to do that, even if I wanted to right now. So I'm just gonna do it super simply and melt some chocolate over my same pot of water that I've got going over here. As soon as these come out of the oven and are cooled and are ready to dip, you can also drizzle, you can use candy melts, you can get crazy and fold different things into these. Like maybe you want some chia seeds in here, maybe you want poppy seeds, maybe some chocolate chunks sound good in here. Feel free to play around with that. This is a pretty versatile product, and so long as we get the consistency okay in the batter, it should bake up just fine. So I'm going to grab my sheet tray here. And I've got a little Silpat here that I'm using just because it's the quarter sheet size, but parchment is great for this. If you don't have anything to line your pan with, go ahead and give it a spray or lightly rub it down with some oil or some butter. These will stick a little bit if they're not on a non-stick surface. So I don't want you to have to struggle too much. Something that I think I mentioned in the recipe as well is that if you want a punchier coconut flavor and you have it on hand, you can add a couple of drops of coconut extract to this. You can also add some coconut rum. I do have a little bit of coconut rum, so I'm going to add just a touch. I'm basically just not even going to do a full cap here. I don't want to make my mix too wet. That's about half a cap. Be very careful if you're using coconut extract. It's very strong and it'll almost kind of burn. I would literally just use 2 or 3 drops, maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon. I'm just gonna mix that in. All right. So, now that we're at this point, I feel like we have a pretty good texture here. I know that most of you probably don't have like a cookie scoop. If you have an ice cream scoop that's not too big, you're welcome to use that. Even me, my only scoop is this muffin one, which is way too big. So I'm gonna go ahead and just use a spoon to scoop these guys. And I've got my 2 spoons here. I'll swap these. And I'm just kind of gonna take these bad boys and press it together with the spoons, and then come from the other direction till I get kind of a rounded shape. And if our texture is right on these, they should hold together pretty well. So I've got my lump of coconut here. I'm just kind of going to slide it off onto the tray, and I think that'll hold together pretty well. And this should probably give me a fairly consistent size, but honestly, without a scoop, it can be hard to measure that, and I'm not too worried about it. They're all gonna get eaten. So once again, I did not promise you professionalism, and I will not be providing any at this time. So here we go. These are a really great dessert, kind of for any time. I really like these a lot. I know people have mixed feelings about coconut, or strong feelings, I should say. A lot of people really, really love it, and a lot of people really hate it. So, you know, haters should avoid this for sure. But it's a great gluten-free and dairy-free recipe for friends that have those sensitivities. Obviously, it's not vegan. It does have egg whites in it. But I like having these on hand because I find that they can accommodate most dietary restrictions. And there are a lot of those these days. So it's nice to be able to have something that doesn't just feel like a total cop-out for people that have those dietary restrictions. All right, and I do have a little bit of mix left over. I'm gonna go ahead and bake it later on. This is something that will keep fine in the fridge too. You may have to temper it a little bit if it gets too cold to easily scoop, but if you don't want to bake them all today, that's fine. It'll keep for a day or so in the fridge. Mostly, I just don't want to grab another sheet tray right now, so I'll get this first bake done so you guys can see it, and then I can finish the rest of these off today when you don't have to stare at me doing boring spoon work. So, all right. Again, my oven is at 350 degrees right now. I've got kind of a center rack position, and I'm just gonna pop these in for 5 minutes to start. I think they're gonna take 15 to 18 total, but I just wanna make sure that they don't brown too much on one side, so I'm gonna check them after about 5 minutes. Set my timer. No Siri. not you. You're not needed. As I'm walking over to the oven, just thought we would take another look at the challah loaf here. It's definitely growing, which is great. Looks like it's doing good. It's starting to feel lighter, but I don't know if you can see as I'm pressing the dough here, I'm not leaving, it's kind of springing back pretty well, and it feels like pretty similar to touching my forearm here, which is a little bit denser than I want it to feel before I actually throw it in the oven. I want it to be a little more aerated, and it should be to the point where if I'm touching it, the fingerprint almost stays there. It doesn't really spring back at all. So we're gonna keep letting this guy go, but I think within the next hour, he'll be ready to go in the oven. It's pretty warm in my place today. I don't know how everything is where you're at in your neck of the woods, but it's a sunny, beautiful day in Seattle, and the sun is definitely coming in pretty strong here. I don't have any windows open just in case like a siren went by or something like that. I'm trying to make it easy to watch, although I know the technical difficulties have been numerous at this point. But yeah, it's a little bit warm in here today, which is not a bad thing for proofing bread. So I will suffer through and drink some water. Something I do to amuse myself in these quarantine times is to drink water out of a glass that says beer. There's something very satisfying about that, so that's what I'm doing. Okay. So I'm going to turn my pot of water back on. Again, just kind of setting it to medium-low. And then I've got my box of chocolate here. Grab a bowl. So I'm just grabbing a heat-proof bowl. So I can set it over my double boiler. You can use glass, like a Pyrex type material, or stainless steel. And you can also do this in the microwave. If you want to melt your chocolate in the microwave, that's fine. I would just advise doing it in like 30-second increments and stirring it in between so you don't burn it, because it's quite easy to burn it. And this is almost certainly more than I need, but that's fine. I've got more of these guys to bake later on, and I can always just kind of honestly pour it out onto some parchment, sprinkle some more coconut on top, and have an extra little chocolate snack. So I'm not worried about that. All right, my timer is going off again. And I'll just show you guys, so you can see how it kind of, some of the basically the meringue, has melted out here, and that I think they were just a little too wet. They needed a little more coconut. But they're still baking up just fine. It's gonna still taste great. They just look a little messier than I'd prefer. But they feel just a little bit loose. I'm kind of wiggling them around here. And I think I wanna put them in for maybe another 3 minutes or so before I pull them out and let them cool. So. Okay. So back to my chocolate. I'm just gonna pop this on the double boiler to start melting. I'm gonna do this pretty slowly. It's gonna be another few minutes before the macaroons are ready to be dipped anyways. They should really cool completely before we do that. I might try to rush the process a little bit, given that I'm not trying to keep you here all day. But yeah, I'll just kind of let that slowly melt, give it an occasional stir, and then I can keep it warm the rest of the time. So as it starts to melt, it's very good to keep it moving, which I'm going to step over and do on my chocolate over here. This is not a super high quality chocolate. These are just baking chips. So I'm not using, this isn't chocolate that I would try to temper. It's pretty similar to a chocolate chip. But I've never had any trouble melting it down. So my guess would be that it's scorched at some point, and once that happens, it can kind of create a chain reaction in the rest of the chocolate. All right, so I'm gonna pull these guys out. They look a little funny, but they smell good, and they're gonna taste good, so I'm fine with that. I don't know about you guys, but I'm fine with that. And I'll just give you a view of how my chocolate's looking over here. I've been stirring it around with the rubber spatula, and it's definitely looking pretty uniform. It's not separating on me. I've got my water on pretty low heat, so that you definitely want to keep the heat gentle whenever you're working with chocolate. It is very sensitive and will scorch pretty easily. You definitely will see a lot of recipes that incorporate butter into the chocolate when you melt it. I have a flourless chocolate cake recipe that does that, which is another gluten-free option we can do at some point if people would like. And I have brownies. I have a brownie recipe that's really delicious that you do that as well. It just depends. Not every recipe has butter in it. So if that's something, I think that for dipping purposes, it's best to just have the chocolate itself. You'll get like a little bit better texture, and the butter might keep it from fully setting up at the end. But if you're more comfortable with that, you can add a little bit of butter and then just throw them in the freezer to set it up once they come out. So, you know, do what works for you. Let's see. My chocolate is just about melted. Since I just pulled these macaroons out, I'm actually just gonna shut the heat off on my double boiler. I've still got a few chunks in there, but the residual heat from that hot water is gonna be plenty to melt that, so long as I keep stirring it every so often. And then I'll just kind of leave it on there to keep it nice and warm. So it stays liquid, but I'm not gonna burn it. I'm not at risk of burning it. You can see they're already almost gone from me just stirring it like this off the heat, because there's enough residual heat in the melted chocolate already. So I'll just pop this back on, pull it off the heat, and I think what might be a good idea now, let's see. Yeah, while we're waiting for the macaroons to cool a little bit, our bread is still proofing. It's not quite ready to go in the oven yet, but you can see with the two loaves how much closer it is. I don't know if you remember how much smaller this one looked compared to this guy, but it's definitely coming along nicely. I see this end is like pulling away a little bit. That's fine. You can pinch it back a little bit or just let it go. It'll be just fine. You'll notice that it tends to proof at the ends quicker than it does in the center. So over here, it's feeling quite ready actually. You can see as I'm just very lightly poking it, I'm leaving an indentation in the ends. But as I work closer to the center, it's just not quite as airy as it is down here. So I want to let this part get a full proof in before I actually throw it in the oven. And this really isn't at any risk of becoming overproofed in that amount of time. I'm not worried about that at all. So I'm just going to let it go for maybe another 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, we'll see. But it's definitely moving along and getting pretty close. So let's see. Thank you, Trista, very much. Yeah, I don't know. Trista's in Missouri, so I don't know if you guys have QFC over there, but it's a Kroger brand. So like Smith's or Kroger or I don't know, Fred Meyer. I'm not exactly sure what other Kroger brands there are right now. I'm drawing a blank. But I'm sure that they exist in your area, Trista, if you want to take a look for it. So I'm eager to see how this turned out. And it's a little dicey for me to cut into it on live broadcast, but you only live once, and I want to live dangerously. So I'm going to take a look inside. It's still just a little bit warm, but it's going to be okay. And I think I'm just going to cut it right about here. And take a look. Oh yeah, that came out nice. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but I've got a really nice little spiral in here. It looks like the cinnamon sugar was evenly distributed. If this is something you want to do with your loaf, I did record a very haphazard video of me doing this earlier today, and I will post it in the group for you to take a look. But you can see the filling is actually quite thin, so it didn't account for a lot of the volume of the loaf itself, which means that the one that we made over here should be pretty similar. But this is a nice closed crumb. You can see it looks like spongy and soft, but there aren't big air bubbles, there aren't big holes in it. It's all like pretty well structured, which is definitely what we're going for. And yeah, I'm quite happy with this. Maybe we should have a little taste here. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm about ready for a snack. It's kind of a fun way to do it. Happy with that for sure. Well, I think that calls for a celebratory drink. So I'm gonna rinse the top of this actually. You should probably always do this, but I never really have. But in the time of COVID, we must take extra precautions to stay healthy, stay safe, and stay hydrated. So, from the can into the glass, still a little bit left over. Cheers, everyone. Yum. You know, these aren't half bad, you guys. I honestly think they're gonna be okay. They look a little funny. We should have added some more coconut. Rather, I should have. But I really think they're gonna be okay. I'm going to pop them onto a rack just to speed up the cooling process. And one good way to tell that they're baked all the way through, they should come off pretty easily. They shouldn't be like super sticky or falling apart. So these are still a little warm, so they're definitely a little gentle, but I can feel as I'm pulling them that the structure is there, and they're baked all the way through. But bear in mind too, from like a food safety standpoint, we cooked the egg yolks in these already. So they're quite safe to consume. Honestly, egg whites are pretty safe to consume raw anyways. But we did actually have a cooked product by the time these were going into the oven. So, and all of the parts of the egg that carry salmonella and stuff wasn't present in this recipe. That's all in the yolk. So no need to worry about that. Let's see. Okay. See you later, Matt. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sticking it out. I know this has been a long one, guys, so I really appreciate those of you who are able to come for any amount of time. This has been really fun for me. I really like baking with people, and I love the freedom of doing it, you know, kind of just like building our own plan for it. It's fun to do it at work for sure, but it still feels like work at the end of the day. And I really enjoy this, and you know, it seems like people are feeling inspired to do some amount of baking right now. So my getting to just nerd out about this stuff into an actual responsive environment instead of just screaming it into the void while I drink my canned wine home alone is really great for me, and I appreciate you guys, and I hope you're having a good time, because that's ultimately what this is about. So let's see. If the macaroons are falling apart pretty easily, yeah, that could be a couple of things. Definitely not having them pressed tightly enough is one potential cause. This is a very common thing, Andy, and I've had it happen to me a lot at work also with an old recipe that I no longer use, but was the one that I walked into when I started at the Rainier Club. And if the mix is too wet, they will definitely want to fall apart. And if they didn't get baked long enough, sometimes they'll want to fall apart. Also, if the mix is too dry, it needs enough to bind it all together. So it's kind of one of those weird things of striking that balance. And you can see here, even I did not do like a perfect job of that. I have meringue melting out the sides of this. They're far from a perfect coconut macaroon. They're going to taste delicious, but they don't look perfect. And that's okay with me. It's going to have to be at this point. But yeah, it's definitely kind of one of those things where you have to develop an eye for it, I guess. So maybe if you want to take a photo, or I'm not sure if you're just asking this hypothetically or if you've made these and they're falling apart, but if you want to take a photo and send it to me, I can do a little better job of troubleshooting what's actually going on in your particular mix. There are a couple of different things that could have happened there. And because this recipe, even I had to make some adjustments along the way, I take full responsibility for that. So yeah, if you have time, you want to snap a photo and send it to me, I'd love to look at that and see if I can troubleshoot that a little bit for you. One thing I will say is that once they've cooled a little bit, you can press them back together again. If they're kind of falling apart, you can take them and just gently kind of cup your hand over them and squeeze and hold it there for a second. And a lot of times that will be enough to recombine them while they're still a little bit warm. So when they cool as a single unit. I've definitely done that in the past, and it works pretty well if, so long as you have enough moisture in your mix. If it's too dry, it might still be kind of like crumbly and want to fall apart on you. So it just really depends on what's going on there. But yeah, so it's up to you how you want to do your chocolate. I fully support individuality here, and want people to feel free to do whatever feels easy or decorative or fun. I like a fair amount of chocolate on these guys myself. So I'm going to dip them in the chocolate. If you want to drizzle, I will do a demonstration of how to fold a chocolate cone. And you can also just do the old trick of cutting a hole in a Ziploc. That works. You can also just use a fork or a spoon to drizzle it over. Whatever works for you. This is your parade, and I'm not here to rain on it. So I've just got a sheet of parchment here because I'm going to be dipping, and I want a non-stick surface to place them on for the chocolate to set. But if you do want to just drizzle, you can kind of put them anywhere. You don't have to worry too much about that, but I don't want my chocolate to adhere to the surface and then lose half of it or break apart my macaroon when I try to go and eat it here in a few minutes. So I'm going to pull my chocolate over, and it's got a nice consistency to it. it's not super hot. Chocolate melts at a pretty low temperature. If you think about it, it melts in your mouth, right? So, you know, you don't need it to be hot in order for it to be workable here. So, thanks for joining us, Lene. Anytime you can join is great. I'll be posting the video again. If you missed any part of it, I'll be posting it to the group, so don't stress. I know a lot of people are working from home and have to actually work from home, don't have the luxury of just taking a 2-hour break in the middle of the day, so I am not at all offended. And if you need to leave at any point and come back, that is totally fine. So yeah, I've got my chocolate here, and I'm just gonna take this guy and dip it just really at the base. I don't want it too far up. And just so I don't end up with an excess of chocolate on the bottom, I'm just gonna give it a little wipe on the bowl and drop it down. And this is a good amount of chocolate for me. If you like more chocolate, if you like milk chocolate, if you like white chocolate, you do you. I'm dark chocolate all the way, and I kind of want it to be an accent to my macaroons, not the dominating flavor. So that's what I'm going for. And you'll notice some little chunks going into your chocolate. That's okay. Like I said, you can pour this out onto a piece of parchment or a silpat or some tin foil and throw it on a sheet tray and pop it in the freezer, and you've basically got a coconut chocolate bar at that point. Don't throw it away. It's still chocolate, so you know I won't be throwing it away. Oh. Did we have some technical difficulties again? Very common, so. All right. Facebook is probably going crazy with how long this video is, but I don't care, so. Here we go. I'm just kind of peeling off this excess meringue a little bit. It's not as good as the coconutty part, so. Dipping away. You can twist it a little bit as your chocolate gets lower to get it fully up around the sides as much as you want it. You can also put it in a narrower container so that it goes up higher. I just think this bowl is pretty easy for dipping, so let's see. Okay, Trista's asking if I find myself baking more for others or for my own personal enjoyment. Honestly, they're kind of one and the same. I like what I like, for sure. I'm much less of a dessert person than you might expect for being a pastry chef. I really love savory food, which is why I'm such a bread lover. I really like making it, but I also really like eating it. But food is how I take care of people. It's how I invest in people. It's how I show them I love them, and I want to be there with them and for them. And it's just how I nurture people that I care about in my life. I think it's something that everyone needs and hopefully everyone likes. And something that just feels good and feels nourishing on like a physical level, but I think also an emotional level. So I like making people things that they like. And I enjoy this process. I think it's fun. I think it's cool and interesting, and especially when I'm working with yeasted products and I get to deal with something that's alive and, you know, is keeping me on my toes. That's really fun and exciting for me. I think it can feel stressful for other people, and I think that's totally fair. I'm just in a very lucky position where I feel very gratified by my job, and I can use it to invest in the people that I care about. And, you know, it's a great way to bring people together to share an experience. And this is just an added level of that for me, because now not only, you know, I can't really share these exact macaroons with you, but we're still sharing this experience and these flavors and these products together. So that feels really good for me. Okay, I'm gonna pop these in the freezer to set the chocolate because I didn't temper it. It will set at room temperature. It'll just kind of take a while, and I don't want to wait that long to eat one of these guys. So I'm gonna pop them in the freezer and turn my oven back up to 350 because it is not long before the second loaf of challah is going to be ready to go in. It's looking really good. It's definitely getting to the point where I can almost egg wash it, and I'm just going to have another sip of wine until then. Okay. I'm just going to leave my chocolate here for now because I will eventually get around to baking off the rest of that macaroon batter. But I can remelt this over the double boiler. That's fine. And then, like I said, I'll probably just add a little bit more coconut to it and make it into a rough chocolate candy because I quite like chocolate and coconut together. So definitely not throwing this away. I'm going to take another look at this challah. I think we are looking really good here. I don't know if you guys remember the size that it was before it was proofed, but it is nice and big and fluffy. And if you can see this, as I'm pressing very gently, I'm leaving an indent. This feels very airy over here. And I think we're ready to go in. It's maybe, you know, like I could give it another 20 minutes, honestly, and it would be great. But in the interest of saving time, ending this eventually at some point, I'm going to go ahead and egg wash it and throw it in. So, what should we put on top of this guy? I think maybe some sesame seeds sound nice. Again, you don't have to top your challah. You can do whatever you want. I like a little bit of topping. I think it's nice. I've still got my same egg wash over here, which if you missed it at the beginning was just 2 yolks and a teaspoon or so of water. You can use a whole egg for your egg wash. You can use eggs and cream, eggs and milk, whatever you want. This is a traditional challah, so there's no dairy in this one. The cinnamon sugar one did have some butter that I folded into it, but there's no dairy in this one, so I'm just going to keep it traditional and not add any dairy at this point by putting cream into my egg wash. I'm just going to gently brush it on, try and get all the way to the base. The more coverage you get, like the more of that beautiful shine you'll have when you bake. And I think it also creates a nice texture on the outside. It keeps it from getting kind of a hard crust and instead gives kind of a softer, gentler crust, which is really nice. I'm just brushing with the braid here. Not really putting any pressure. Just trying to get good coverage. Here we go. All right. And then again, just a note is if you feel like you're getting a lot of pooling in these cracks over here, you take your brush and kind of move some of that out. We don't want like a layer of scrambled eggs on top of the challah. And that's something that definitely can happen. It's not going to ruin the loaf, but it's just like a weird textural thing and it doesn't look as nice. So I always try to avoid it. So I'm just going to take some sesame seeds here and sprinkle them on the loaf. They'll get a little toasty as it's baking, which is always nice. Get that chemical reaction, Maillard as it's known. And get some nice caramelization, those nice, sweeter, deeper, more nuanced flavors that come with that toastiness. So we're putting this in the oven at 350 degrees on a center rack. The first loaf took about 25 minutes to bake, so I'm expecting this one to take about the same. I am going to pop it in, check it after about 15 minutes, and probably give it a rotation so I get some nice even browning on it. Sometimes the back of the oven is hotter, so you need to give it a 180 degree rotation in order to get even browning. And yeah, I'm expecting it to take between 25 and 30 minutes. I will post a photo of this when it comes out so you guys can see it. In the meantime, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast because I don't have much else to fill the time while this is in the oven. I will post the video of me filling the filled challah so you guys can do that if you want. And yeah, if you have any other questions or comments or anything you'd like to see, just let me know. Thanks so much for joining me. This has been really great. And I'll see you guys again next week. All right, cheers.